My friend John has this great story about the day that his sister was born. It was January 7th, many years ago, and it was in this small northern Illinois town, and it was during one of the largest, kind of worst winter storms that town had seen in years. And it was during that storm that my friend's mom said to his dad, "I think I'm going to have this baby right now." And so they got in the car and began to back out of the driveway, but there was so much snow that had fallen, the car kind of slid off this driveway into a snowbank, and it got stuck. And my friend's dad, went in forward and reverse, and he actually pushed the car forward and back, but the more he tried to get the car unstuck, the more stuck it seemed to get. So, which is when his mom says, "Dad, I think I'm going to have this baby right now." So they got out of the car, went next door, woke up their neighbors, got their neighbors out of bed, and then the neighbors offered to drive them to the hospital. So now 4 people and a soon-to-be-born baby are on their way to the hospital. But the roads had gotten so snowy and icy that on their way, no kidding, the car hit a patch of ice and slid off the road into a snowbank, and that car got stuck. Which is when his mom said, "I think I'm gonna have this baby right now." And so his dad got out of the car and was doing jumping jacks on the street to flag down another car. They flagged on a car, they get in that car, now there's 6 people and a soon-to-be-born baby in a car going to the hospital, and they arrived literally just minutes before she had that baby. The local paper actually ran a news story about this. The title of the article was, "Frantic Father Beats Stork in Storm to Hospital." Now, there's 2 really simple lessons from that story. Lesson 1 is clearly the Midwest is a terrible place to live. So please don't email me about that if you're from there. The second lesson, a little more personal, stuck happens. Stuck happens. And not just with cars or in bad weather, stuck happens to people. People get stuck in bad habits. People get stuck in bad relationships. People get stuck in bad financial patterns. People get stuck in all sorts of unhealthy lifestyles or emotional patterns. People get stuck in compulsive behaviors and coping mechanisms. Stuck happens, and it seems to happen to everybody. But then 2,000 years ago, there was this man, this carpenter from Nazareth named Jesus, who had this unique ability to get people unstuck. He once said these remarkable words about himself. He said, "If the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed." In other words, not just you will know more stuff about God or you'll be able to be involved in religious activities and enjoy it. No. You will experience a level of freedom that will go deep into the heart of who you are. You will be free indeed. And this actually happened to people. If you open your New Testament, open your Bible, and if you have a Bible, we'd be glad to give you a Bible on your way out. You can open a Bible and look through the stories of the people around Jesus, and you see this experience of freedom happening time and time again. Tax collector named Zacchaeus was very much addicted to wealth and overtaxing his fellow Jewish countrymen, and he had this encounter with Jesus, and then he was freed from his guilt. He actually became the most generous man in his town. There was a Samaritan woman who had this addiction or this pattern of unhealthy relationships, and then she had this encounter with Jesus. And then she experienced this freedom from those habits, from those cycles, and she became the first Samaritan Christ follower, the first Samaritan evangelist. There was a disabled man who had been basically living under these feelings of helplessness and cynicism for 38 years. Imagine living with something for 38 years. Then he had this encounter with Jesus. And he was not only freed from his paralysis, but from 38 years of cynicism and frustration and doubt. The Apostle Paul, who was once the murderous and zealous Saul, was able to find freedom from his anger and his violent habits through an encounter with Jesus. And he would later describe that encounter with Jesus this way. He once wrote, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free." It's for freedom. Again, not just for religious activity or theological knowledge. It is for an experience of life of being unstuck. So a question for you, to get a little personal, no matter what's on your mind or what you brought in with you this morning, where are you stuck? Where are you stuck? Maybe you're stuck in a habit that you're really worried or afraid to talk about with others. Maybe you're stuck using a substance or alcohol or sex or sexual fantasy to kind of mask insecurity or pain or disappointment. Maybe you're stuck with feelings of anger or resentment or a temper you can't control, and you do your best to manage that and control that, but every once in a while, it just roars out of you. That anger's in there. Maybe you can't stop yourself from spending or eating. Maybe you feel stuck in feelings of entitlement or self-righteousness. Maybe you're stuck in a pattern of unhealthy relationships time after time after time. Or maybe you're stuck in unhealthy patterns in your relationships. Maybe you're stuck, but you don't even know that you're stuck. And if you ask someone around you, they could clearly tell you exactly where you're stuck if you ask, but for some reason for you, it just feels like, no, I think I'm doing okay. Well, here's the good news. It is for freedom that Christ came and lived and gave his life on a cross and rose from the grave for all of us. It is for our freedom. Freedom is possible. Transformation is possible. Getting unstuck is possible. That's the good news. What's the bad news? Here's the bad news. A lot of people today never get there. They never get there. A lot of people stay stuck. Even people in churches who have pretty good doctrine and know a lot about the Bible seem to stay at times just stuck. Why is that? Why is that? Well, because getting unstuck requires a series of steps that many people in our day simply won't take. To get unstuck in your life requires from you a series of steps or decisions or practices that many people in our day simply will not take. Consciously or unconsciously, they refuse to take. I'll tell you a story about one of those people. One of those people, at least for much of his life, was a man named Bill Wilson, or Bill W., as some of you may know him. About 80 years ago, Bill W. was a struggling businessman and a World War I veteran. He had been abandoned by his parents as a little child. He had struggled with anxiety and panic attacks in much of his young adult life. And what helped him cope with all those things was alcohol, drinking. In fact, Bill was a pretty serious alcoholic. By his late 30s, drinking was so compulsive that it had cost him his business. He could not keep a job or stay employed. He had been arrested. He had been hospitalized 4 times for alcohol. In fact, on one trip to the hospital, the doctor told his wife that Bill would be in an asylum or a grave within a year. One of those two things. And here's the thing, Bill knew it. He knew it. And yet he still could not drinking. He described it himself. Drinking was a necessity. He said, alcohol was my master. Until one night, when an old drinking buddy of his called and asked if he could come by. This is a buddy who had actually been institutionalized for his alcohol at the time. And so when this friend arrived, Bill had a drink waiting for him, but he refused. And Bill noticed that his friend looked inexplicably different. There was this look in his eye, this smile on his face. And then his friend told Bill a story that would change Bill's life forever. Bill would later describe the conversation this way. He wrote this, "But my friend sat before me and he made the point blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. Had this power originated in him? Obviously it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at the minute, and this was none at all. Here was something at work in a human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings." Bill's friend had been radically changed, or so he was about to find out, by learning to follow the way of Jesus. And that same night, he invited Bill to the Christian community that had changed his life. It was called the Oxford Group. You can actually read about that online if you want to look more up. Look it up. It was a Christian movement in the early 20th century that sought to recapture the life and teaching of Jesus and the early church. They taught people about what it meant to be fully surrendered to Jesus. They worked on practices like self-examination and confession and making amends with others. And they taught about how to carry this message to others who desperately needed it. Not long after that, in that same community, Bill found the power to do what he could not do for himself, and he finally stopped drinking for good. In fact, his transformation was so profound and so remarkable, so supernatural to him that he set out on a mission to help other alcoholics experience the same freedom. So he and a few others took the same biblical teaching they had learned, and they formulated a series of steps that helped them get sober. Any guesses on how many series of steps this new community had found? 12. You know something about that. Bill said he actually later he associated with these steps on the 12 disciples themselves. They actually initially called this new movement, this new community, this new group, a nameless squad of drunks. But they found there's probably some better branding they could do, so eventually that branding evolved to what we now know as Alcoholics Anonymous. Today, as many of you know, AA is a global phenomenon, a global movement, in spite of the fact that it has no paid staff, no denominational headquarters, it owns no properties, no buildings, no media equipment, there's no local bureaucracy, no pastors or priests. There's no music, no lights, no system, no sound system or stage. There's not even a sermon. Can you imagine coming to a group with no sermon? How terrible does that sound? A typical meeting is small and informal. They sit in a circle in chairs, kind of like this right here. The rich and the poor, the young and the old, married, single, divorced, sit side by side, hand in hand. And here's the best part. In those meetings, in that community, there's no need to pretend. There's no need to hide. No need to put on a mask. The only prerequisite is that you want to stop drinking. In other words, the only requirement for membership in the group is that you want to get unstuck. And here's what's amazing. People do. All the time. I read an article that noted, in spite of the advances in medicine over the last 75 years, the 12 steps are still the most effective treatment for addiction the world has ever seen. Have you ever wondered why that is? It's because these steps are rooted in the way Jesus has always taught people to get unstuck. AA received from the Bible and the teaching of Jesus the wisdom and practices that now help millions upon millions find freedom, that same freedom for which Christ came and lived and died. And so, for the next 8 weeks, we're starting a series on these amazing steps of faith called Unstuck. And just so you know, this will not be a deep analysis of AA itself or how it's changed over time. This is a way to unpack the biblical roots of how transformation actually happens in a human life, starting with the first step. That's what we're looking at this weekend, the very first step, the step that is the foundation for everything else a follower of Jesus will ever do in their life. And if you skip this step, if you choose to bypass this step, Christianity will devolve into a set of religious rules that are burdensome to keep, or a set of doctrines that may be hard to understand, and it will never change you. It will never change you. So are you ready? Well, here we go. Step 1. And I've adjusted the wording so it can apply more broadly to all of us. Step 1 is this. We admitted that we were powerless over sin and that our lives had become unmanageable. So just as a kind of moment of liturgy in our community this weekend, let's just say this out loud together. Can we do that? Let's say this out loud with me. We admitted that we were powerless over sin and that our lives had become unmanageable. If you believe that, it can change your life. The problem is most of us, many of us, some of us don't believe that or are unwilling to believe that. See, the first step, as you might notice from the language, is not about doing something or fixing something or solving anything. It's about admitting something. It's about being honest about something. And so much of life we are so quick to, and this happens in churches all the time. In fact, I believe this is one of the reasons why so many people come and try religion, but it does not change them because they use Christianity or whatever other vehicle as a way to fix the problem they're not willing to even admit to. They skip right past step 1. the first step is not about doing something, it's about admitting something. Think for a moment, if you've ever been in a recovery circle or a recovery group, you might know this, about how a person often introduces themselves at an AA meeting. They say something like, "Hi, my name is Scott, and I'm an alcoholic," or "I'm addicted to lust," or "I'm a compulsive debtor," or whatever it may be. Just imagine for a moment if we kind of started doing the meet and greet that way here in the church, right? If you skip to trying to fix your problem before you admit your problem, you will never fix your problem. Let me say that again. If you skip to trying to fix your problem before you admit your problem or even become fully aware of your problem, you will not fix your problem. Which is why step one begins with an honest, direct, and humbling admission that eliminates the possibility of pretense or hiding or putting on masks. And every recovering addict in AA or any 12-step group will tell you this step is a prerequisite for sobriety. They'll tell you, you cannot skip this step. Think of it this way, the level of freedom you experience is based on the level of honesty you express. The level of freedom you're going to experience in your spiritual life is based on the level of honesty you're willing to lean into and express. That's why we start by admitting. We admit. What do we admit? Well, that we are powerless over sin. In AA, it's that we're powerless over alcohol. Or in a sex addicts group, it's we are powerless over sex addiction. Whatever the specifics may be. We are powerless over it. And it's that word powerless that's so important for us to hear today. In other words, when it comes to our problems or our tendency to do wrong or our appetites for wealth or pleasure or getting even, whatever it is, we have to admit that we are powerless. That is, that we are not actually in control. Are you willing to admit that you are not actually in control? Jesus put it this way. I love this line. It's so clear and direct. He said this, "Everyone who sins is a slave to sin." He doesn't say everyone who sins is just sort of is challenged to figure out how to muster up the strength to work through it. No. Is a slave, is mastered by it. Now, I know in our day that word sin's not a popular word. Maybe you feel or you have kind of some baggage with it, like it's a judgmental word or a self-righteous word. But in the Bible, the word sin simply means to miss the mark. It means that our bodies, our minds, our thoughts, our actions, our feelings don't work the way they should work. Simple as that. They just don't work the way they should work. And we all miss the mark, even with our own standards. And here's what's so interesting about this. You don't have to believe in God to believe in sin. In fact, even if you don't believe in God, I can tell you this, you believe in sin. Because everyone out there has a list of shoulds that they believe they should follow. And here's what's so funny. Even if you don't believe in God, you can't even do what you think you should do. I mean, think about it. You know you should save, but you keep spending. You know you should eat better, but you choose not to. You know you should work on your marriage, but you keep avoiding it. I mean, think about how weird this is. I mean, what other species on the planet has this problem? I mean, dogs don't wake up thinking, I should really spend more time with my owner, and then go do the opposite. Why? Because they're dogs, and they love their master no matter what. Cats don't wake up thinking, I really should be more loving at home, because they're cats and they have no soul. Don't do that. Think of how odd it is that we human beings have this behavior. What's the explanation for it? Why do we do this? You know what you should do, regardless of your sense of if there's a God or not. You can't even do what you think you should do. And the Apostle Paul himself he wrote about this dynamic in his own life. He wrote these words, "I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. I'm powerless," he says. And notice what Paul doesn't say. He doesn't say, I'm just going to try harder to do the right thing. I'll just wake up tomorrow and I'll try harder. I'll think more about it. I'll read more. I'll just use my own willpower and determination and I'll get there. He simply admits, I know the right thing, but I cannot do it. Even the Apostle Paul, the greatest theologian the church has ever known, who planted the very first churches that have ever been in existence, admitted this. He took the first step. I know what to do, but I can't do it. It's why all those repeated commitments that you make all the time in your own life, those commitments to be more patient or to stop yelling at your kids or to clean up your thought life, they never seem to work. You make it for a day or 2 or 3 or 7 or 2 weeks, and then somehow or another, you're right back into it. Because you see, sin isn't just wrongdoing. Sin at its core is the reality that you're stuck. It's being enslaved. It's like an addiction to self-reliance or to being in control. Sin is trying to manage your life independently from God, and the enemy would like nothing more than to convince you it's all about some taboo sins out there that you can do or avoid versus actually looking at the source of it in your heart that just simply says, I need to be in control. And this goes back to the very first temptation in the Garden of Eden when the serpent tempted the first human beings. Take a Bible this week, look back to the first chapters, you can read about this. Anyone remember what the serpent actually tempted the first human beings with? Genesis 3:5, the original sin, the moment humanity fell, the moment that caused it all, he said this, we weren't tempted with sex or money or pleasure. The serpent said, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God. You see, sin is playing God instead of trusting God. That's the heart of it. That's the core of it. Sin is playing God instead of trusting God. It's the illusion that I can take better care of my life myself, that I can manage it, I can control it, I can handle it. And we say this about stuff all the time, don't we? That's why we strive ceaselessly to manage our image and reputation amongst others so we can control how people see us. It's why we try to control and manage other people in our relationships, even people that we love and we're close to, even if it means deceiving or manipulating them, and people do it all the time. It's why we're constantly trying to control our circumstances. We want to avoid pain and have things work out for ourselves. It's why we often will manage our pain, and people work tirelessly to manage their own pain and discomfort, whether that's through alcohol or pleasure or sexual fantasy or whatever it is, regardless of who it might hurt. We want to be in control. Why? Because we're addicted to it. You're addicted to it. That's what sin is, trying to control our lives independently from God. And here's the thing about addiction. You can't beat it on your own. You can't beat it by willpower alone. Because trying to play God, trying to have that strength, trying to make that promise to yourself, I will get up tomorrow and I will finally do this, that's what's killing you. Which is why the first step towards freedom is not trying harder to control, it's coming to the conclusion, the awareness, that terrifyingly humbling awareness that you are not in control. That you are powerless over your sin and you cannot control what's really wrong with you. Do you believe that? Because here's the thing, everything inside of you is going to resist this. Everything inside of you is going to resist this. Right now you're thinking, and some of you, as soon as I said 12 steps, you thought, this is for somebody else. This is for somebody who's really broken. You know? And we do that, don't we? I mean, some of us would rather just stay stuck. We'd rather stay stuck in our anger or our greed or self-righteousness. It's kind of working for you in a way, like a drink is to an alcoholic. It's just kind of helping you manage your life. Some of you are convinced you're not stuck. This whole sin word, it's somebody else's problem, not mine, and I can manage it. My life's looking pretty good. I'm on top of things. I'm doing well, I'm living well, I've got a good job. I feel like I'm just basically the master of my own life. Some of you, as I said, are convinced this is somebody else's problem. You're thinking to yourself, well, as long as I can see out there in the world there's a few people doing worse than me, then I can just go about my business and God better take care of those people first. Let me tell you another story. Jesus once told a story of 2 different individuals who came to the temple to pray, to do business with God. One man was a man who was righteous by all external standards. He believed in God, he kept the rules. The other was a tax collector. He was a moral outcast. He was a financial embezzler, and everybody knew it. He would have been seen as a person irreligious in his day in every way. The religious man prayed these words. He prayed, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector over here. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all I get. Notice his prayer is a way of saying, I've got my problems under control. I don't steal, I don't commit adultery, I fast and give, which means clearly money and indulgence are not my problems. God, I'm so thankful that you've spared me from the problems that other people seem to have. But the tax collector, the embezzler, the outcast, the one who was seen as not having anything to do with God, prayed a much different prayer. He simply said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. God, have mercy on me, a sinner. He does not even use the normal word for mercy. He uses this word that means make an atonement for me, God. In other words, I can't do it myself, God. And in the original language, he doesn't just say, I'm a sinner. He uses a definite article like the word the. He says, I'm the sinner. In other words, no one to compare myself to. I'm not justified by being better than this guy. I am the one who is messed up here. All this man knows for sure is that he's got a problem he cannot fix on his own. One that runs so deep, there's no need to pretend, no need for pretense, no need for flowery language that he doesn't actually believe. All he knows is that he is powerless, that he cannot fix his problem or just compare himself to others. The only way forward for him is to admit that he has no way forward. Do you see that? The only way forward for him is to admit that he has no way forward. The only solution is surrender. So let me ask you this question. Who do you think was right with God? Who was really right with God? The one who knew the rules, who practiced the rules, who did the good stuff, the one who everyone would have believed, of course it's that guy. We've seen him before. He's great. He serves. He knows the answers. Of course it's that guy. Or it's the one that they would all have said, that guy has no chance to be close to God. We've seen his life. We know his beliefs. There's no way. Listen to what Jesus said. I tell you that this man, the tax collector, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. In other words, we admit that we are powerless over the sin that is in us. We are not in control. That sin is in control. The alcohol is in control. Lust is in control. Greed is in control. My anger is in control. My fear is in control. Friends, this is step one. And here's the thing. There's no way around the step. There's no way around the step. There's no other way to begin. And just because you may already be a Christian, a Christ follower, doesn't make you exempt from meeting this step in your life. There's a Franciscan priest and writer named Richard Rohr who put it this way. He wrote, Christians are usually sincere and well-intentioned people until you get to any real issues of ego, control, power, money, and pleasure. Then they tend to be pretty much like everybody else. And we all laugh because it's true, isn't it? And here's what I need to confess. I do this too. It's true for me too. I make idols out of success and reputation. I use words every day to try to make myself a little better than I actually am. I'm hesitant to give because I love my comfort and security. I'm easily angered because I want life to go my way. I hold grudges because it feels good and I like being able to hold that against somebody somewhere down the road. I work harder to manage my image than to humble my heart. And I can be so consumed by my need for approval and applause. I mean, I was thinking about it even this week as I was preparing this message on how to be broken. I kept thinking to myself, gosh, I really hope people love my sermon. I mean, think about that. I need step one. I, your pastor, need step one. To humbly and boldly admit that I am not in control. That wherever sin has a hold on my heart, it's in control. And that word sin sometimes in churches can be a word, even though we've used it to kind of cover kind of the gamut of things, can be a word that we hide behind so that we don't have to be specific about what's really going on. And here's the thing. I need this step, and I think, I can guess, you may need this step too. You may need this step too. That control and image management and hiding certain habits and pretending to be something different on the outside than you really are on the inside is something that's going on in your life too. I think you need this step too. Because no matter how spiritually mature you think you are, you're never actually done with step one. We have a lot of steps we're going to cover together in this series, but you're never fully done with step one. Talk to someone in recovery, they'll tell you, you never get beyond your need for this. It's why AA meetings always begin the same way. Hi, my name is Bill, and I'm an alcoholic. And even if you've been sober for 30 years, they don't say, well, I was once an alcoholic, but now I've kind of got that under control. I'm feeling really good with myself. No. Hi, I'm Bill. This is still me. I'm still an alcoholic. I've been sober for 30 years. And what do people say back? Hi, Bill. No judging. No condescending. No one's thinking, gosh, I'm so glad I don't have that problem. You see, it's step one that finally creates that kind of community that we crave so much, that kind of community that was so clear and present around Jesus in his ministry. It was a community where everybody's welcome and nobody's perfect. It's a community where all the world's categories of who's better off drift into the background. It's a community where a CEO will sit next to someone who's unemployed. It's a community where people in suits are no different than people off the streets. The only requirement at AA is that you want to stop drinking. That is, you want to get unstuck. And here's the thing. Being part of a church should be no different, should it? Churches should be places where people who are stuck can get unstuck, where people that want to get unstuck can get unstuck, where broken people can get well. And if that's you today, welcome home. Welcome home. And if you don't think you're much of a mess, stick around. I think we can help you find that inner mess inside of you. Just give us a little time. We'll help you get there. Because this is a place where everybody's welcome and nobody's perfect. Doesn't matter what your background is, doesn't matter what you've believed up until now or what you've done up until now. The only question I have for you is simply this: do you want to get unstuck? Or as Jesus once put it in his ministry, do you want to get well? Not how good are you or how well is your life put together. Do you want to get unstuck? And if you do, Jesus says step one's your next step. This is your next step. And if you want to take this step, I can give you this quick word of advice. You can't do this alone. You cannot do this alone. The first word of step one is what word? It's the word we. We admitted. We surrendered. We listened to each other. We encourage each other. We cheer each other on. We do this. We are in this together. That's why we talk so much about community here at North Shore. That's why we have opportunities like small groups. If you're not connected to community, take a step, get in community. You can ask somebody outside at the welcome table, find somebody on staff. We can help you find connections and get into a place where everybody else is broken just like you. We're on a mission on this series to normalize broken because it's normal. It's in this room right now. And the last thing we want to create in our cultural context is a place where people feel like, gosh, if I go to that church, I better put myself together and pretend to be somebody I'm not. Because that's when the enemy has us. That's when we're powerless. Because you see, transformation doesn't happen in isolation. Doesn't, can't, won't. It happens in circles, with chairs, a lot like this, with people a lot like you and a lot like me, who simply take off their mask, get real, and take step one together. Hi, my name is Scott, and I'm a messed up, egotistical, self-righteous sinner who is desperately in need of God. I'm not in control. And now, it gets to be your turn. If you want it to be, it's your turn. And if this feels uncomfortable, if this feels scary, it's because it is. The first step is always the hardest step to take. This is the one that pretty much everyone will universally avoid because it's the hardest one to take. This past week, our 1-year-old daughter took her very first step on her own, and she let go of Nina's hands, and she took that first step out there and took that step into my arms. And we were so excited. I mean, Nina was screaming, and I was crying. We had like 4 or 5 cameras going from every angle. We're those parents, right? And of course, after those first steps, any guesses on what happened? She took like a face plant, like right on the floor, right? Exactly. Because those first steps are the hardest steps. And then it was so fascinating to watch her. Right after that first fall, she went right back to crawling around the room. She went right back to what she was comfortable doing. You know, it's interesting. Most people won't take step one because crawling feels easier than walking. And we're used to it. Just like drinking feels a lot easier than sobriety. Hiding feels a lot easier than coming clean. Hanging on to your pride feels easier than letting go because we're used to it. We've been doing it for a long time. Playing God feels safer than trusting God. Of course it does. But if I may be so bold as to speak directly into your life, this is why you're sick. This is why you feel spiritually dead inside week after week after week. This is why you don't change. We so often talk about and use grace like it's a coping mechanism to get us from sin to sin to sin and keep God from getting angry at us. It's a healing agent for those who are broken and know that they're broken. Paul put it this way. He wrote, "But God said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in" what? In weakness. "Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me." You see, years after his conversion, years after his first encounter with Christ, Paul was still practicing step one. He was still practicing step one. He was still admitting that he was powerless over sin and that left to himself, his life was in chaos. It was out of control. So question, what about you? What about you? There's an old saying in recovery circles, because so many recovery groups meet in basements of community centers or churches. There's an old saying in recovery groups that goes like this: you can come down here and change, or stay up there and stay the same. In other words, you can let go of your pride. You can admit you're not as put together as you may appear. You can humble yourself and take step one and truly change. Or you can keep doing what you're doing. You can keep hiding or drinking or using or posturing or pretending, and you can stay the same. The choice is up to you. And next week, we're going to look at the second step that's as crucial as the first one. But to find out what that is, you'll have to come back next week. But for now, let's pray. Jesus, you've given us this powerful choice that so many people in our day are so afraid to make. God, I know I am. I know it's fear and insecurity and that relentless need to be in control and manage my life that's keeping me sick. That's keeping me from experiencing the freedom that you died for, that you paid for, that's available to all of us right now, if we but take this step. And so, Jesus, I pray for all of my brothers and sisters in this room and listening right now that you help us take this step of just admitting, of naming, of getting real, of being honest, of humbling ourselves. Lord, have mercy on us. We're just sinners. We're just broken. And we know, Jesus, that when we do this, there is that grace, that power that can rest on us and free us and change us. And so as we sing this next song, as we close with these words, these words, Jesus, will be our closing words of confession and surrender to you as our word, our first step in this process, this journey of getting unstuck and experiencing the freedom that you paid for. And everybody who agreed with this prayer said, amen.